then we'll open it for questions for CA. Excuse me, I'm going to cough for a second. While we're waiting, how many in here have used a decentralized exchange? If you want to, you can either pipe in.
Yeah, I've used various types of decentralized exchanges and technology stacks within the DeFi space.
Yeah.
So I guess the one I used most is really like Atomic DEX.
Now, what made you choose that? Like, what was your motivation to choose that versus the different types?
Well, I think I'm a bit biased here because it's the DEX that we've developed over the last like 6-7 years, right? Like, so yeah. I did. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good, brother. I was gonna say, yeah, I've used Atomic DEX quite a bit, but also some of the EVM, like Uniswap, even Pancake Swap, and other protocols along the way, 1inch, and certainly I prefer Atomic DEX for a number of reasons, but quite a few.
Yeah, I was gonna add, just like for transparency, the one I probably used like the number 2, like in terms of like intensity is really like 1inch. Yeah, thanks for bringing that one up, Johnny. But we've technically even like looked into potentially routing 1inch like specific orders and order books over to our users for the case that they might be cheaper and more efficient for them, right? So, but yeah, anyway, we could touch on that later.
Oh, that's going to be an exciting topic. It's like we're having an appetizer. And Patrick's he's joining now. Hey, Archie, thank you so much for overseeing this as always.
Yeah, no problem. Nice to see you guys.
So Patrick's joining us now. Once he joins, we'll kind of do our little intro to the topic and get started. I know everybody here, it's a beautiful, very rare, beautiful, sunny Pittsburgh afternoon. So I know everybody wants to have their weekend too, but I am excited about this topic, especially with the timing of it. I mean, what's going on right now with centralized exchanges is pretty. It's like every day we wake up to some hell of some form. So I'm excited to have the discussion about alternatives. And I don't know if Patrick is having a. Oh, you are. It just shows loading for some reason.
Oh, all right. No, I'm here. Do you want to? I think you were going to kick it off today, and then I'm going to do commentary if I have anything to add before we get to our guests.
Sounds perfect. And Patrick, do you want to do the PowerPoint, or you want me to?
If you have it up, that would be great. Does it look like I can pull it up though? I didn't know if you changed anything in it. Here, I can. Well.
Okay, you want to pull it up?
Yeah, let me pull it up.
Okay.
Microsoft is so bad at version control, so I'm going to download a copy. Yeah, let's see.
Hello.
You see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Full screen now?
It's loading up, I think. There, maybe.
Yeah. Well, it's like switching on and off. It's like not holding it. It's kind of weird. It's never done that before.
And you still can't see me?
I can SDU, but
Okay,
the screen.
I tell you what. Let me take my. I might have too many machines
Take your camera off.
attached. So let me take my let me take myself off screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Take mine off too.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay, that might be it. Okay, Laura, I'll hand it over you to do our intro.
Interest. Okay. Oh, shoot, Patrick, it's doing it again. Let me try.
Okay.
I'm gonna try. Sorry, guys. Thanks for your patience. Not sure why it's acting so wonky today. We haven't had that.
I mean, I've got.
Okay. One sec. It's not letting me pull my window that I want. All right.
There it goes.
Mine working for you guys?
I can see it. I don't know if anybody
Okay.
else can.
All right. So today we're going to talk about decentralized exchanges. We're really glad to have special guest CA from Komodo, and correct me if I'm wrong, CA. You're the CTO, correct? Not hearing.
Okay, now yes, that's correct. Sorry, Laura. This is my
Oh no, that's okay.
mic.
That's
If
okay.
I switched it, I hope you hear me now. Yeah.
I can hear you great now. Thank you.
And Laura, we're just seeing your Discord interface.
It's not showing my. I've got the PowerPoint out. What is going on with this thing?
I'm blaming Discord today.
I'm blaming Discord today too. Hold on one second.
I think that's always fair to blame Discord.
I mean,
If we could just
always
put it on the
knock on wood
blockchain,
because
right?
I've got this excellent internet here and I never have any problems. So
Again, sorry for your patience, guys. Let me try again.
While we're here, welcome to the room. A couple other folks. Zai guy. How about that? Twinsin? Sly? Look at that. Some folks I'm not all that familiar with, but glad to have you.
hey, there we go.
Good now?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, I'll try it again. So welcome CA and welcome all our new people and our veterans to the talk today. So we can talk about, just describing what a decentralized exchange is. What Patrick and I are going to do is just a general overview of the topic, and then let everybody kind of get into some deeper, detailed questions for CA. This will be recorded and put back on to the resources channel, so you could come back to it. And anybody's free to use these PowerPoints, and they'll be posted as well. So we're going to talk about what a decentralized exchange is. Understand the difference between the centralized and decentralized exchanges. I know there's a lot of people in here who are pretty veteran at this topic, so we're not going to get too technical with it, but this is just an overview. To understand the different types of decentralized exchanges, and then to evaluate the pros and cons. And we have we'll have a resources slide at the end that you can go and look what we use for our resources for this topic. So, what's a decentralized exchanges? And you hear it DEX for short. The thing that's really kind of the point of a decentralized exchange is that it allows you to interact peer-to-peer, where you're not requiring on that intermediary of a centralized exchange. And in that freedom of peer-to-peer, we're going to explore some of the pros and the cons of that, what that means. but to give you a lot more control over, what you're working with and how you're working with it when it comes to cryptocurrencies. Do you want to add anything to that,
No, I think that's it.
Patrick?
Mainly it's peer-to-peer, right?
It's just
Two-part-
really, I mean, that's
two-party
really
system.
it's a two-party system, exactly right. Using smart contracts to help us use a peer-to-peer exchange. So the different types of exchanges or DEXs, the on order and the off order really is kind of one type. There's really three main types from what I could tell in the research, and those are the ones that process transactions on the blockchain network without the inclusion of a third party. But then you can also have an off-chain order book that it's more centralized. It has a central entity to process that for the governed book. For the automated market makers, so those are more just using algorithms to get price pairs. Then you've got the decentralized aggregators where you're getting that information from a combination of different exchanges. And down here you can kind of see a graphic of, and we didn't create this graphic, but we pulled it from an article, but you can kind of see the flow of that transaction process. But notice there's no centralized entity that's controlling whether or not you can do that. Patrick, did you want to add something to that slide? And CA, at any point, please feel free to jump in and discuss that from your perspective.
Thank you. Thanks. I maybe just add one small information or a small statement here regarding the off-chain order books. I mean, it does definitely I do agree that just by the fact of the technical nature that most of them tend to kind of go towards centralized structures when it comes to their architecture. As for the atomic DEX, we've been figuring it for a long time, right? We were targeting on-chain order book art, but figured it's totally inefficient, right? And if you want something that's kind of close to real time, really fast, etc., you're forced to use an off-chain layer, for the data structures, everything you'd need for an actual order book. So what we did is actually build on a peer-to-peer off-chain order book network, right? So all peers that are part of the decentralized exchange network would also be part of this order book network, right? So even the data of the order books would be stored in a fully decentralized fashion, not on one single server whatsoever, but across the totality of the DEX network, right? So I'm not sure if there's any other DEXs that have an off-chain order book that's really peer-to-peer and 100% decentralized. But as for atomic DEX, that's the case here.
Oh, that's fascinating. I did not realize that. And that's a really good question. Is there anybody else who's doing that? I mean, I know you're for Komodo, but if anybody would know that, it would be you, I'm sure, looking at that side of the industry. So thank you for adding that to that. Does anybody else have anything to add on this page?
No, I think that was a good point that brought up is when you look at all the components to make it decentralized, there might be other aspects of it that seem more centralized, right, of the components, but kind of how the order books are truly decentralized data sources in themselves.
Yeah, we can add a little correction to that when we post this. Okay, so we're going to just talk real briefly about the main differences between a decentralized and a centralized exchange. And we've done that, a little bit up to now. Obviously, it's, decentralized exchange allows you to do, peer-to-peer. The centralized exchange, you're going to have to go through their architecture, their system, their control structure, their on and off switches. And they have their own order book, which, a lot of people will tend to go towards centralized exchanges because it's, they have usually more liquidity, it can be faster, and, those kind of things. The UI usually is more in line with kind of traditional apps and architecture or infrastructure that we've been using in a legacy system. But as we've seen, I mean, really, every day it feels like, again, it's just a. I mean, honestly, CA, I think like every day is a commercial for decentralized exchanges. It seems like because we're seeing now, even just yesterday, that Bittrex is closing U.S. operations because of regulatory climate. So those systems are very, in my view, very fragile because they're so centralized and they're so dependent on not even just the system itself, but on the larger regulatory infrastructure that's depending on the country that they're in. And there's the centralized exchange is the one making all the decisions. Where in the decentralized exchange, you've got a lot more control over what you decide to work with and how you decide to work with that. So, yeah, that's pretty much it as far as the main differences that we wanted to point out. Does anybody want to add anything to that?
I mean, I'd be interested if anybody, especially from the liquidity aspect, right, is that, they offer more liquidity now, but is that something that the decentralized exchanges are kind of addressing? Because I think for traders or corporates or whatever, that's one thing that they're always attempting to, manage is their liquidity and their, working capital.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I don't know, was it like 2-3 years ago, I wrote an article for Cointelegraph around this topic, like specifically in regards like to Binance and a few other bigger like players, without really like naming them. And I mean, back in the day, I haven't reviewed that like until today, but I did an in-depth review back in the day, and we figured, well, we don't know what they do with our money and with our coins that we park on centralized exchanges. Looking at it like from a legal perspective, they could do whatever they wanted, right? They could just launch investment firms. They could like launch a hedge fund. They could just launch a real estate business. If they wanted, they could just do anything like with that money, like literally. So it could even like happen that they will take like coins that kind of like aren't very active on their markets and kind of like move them around like to more active markets, whatever like brings them the bigger margin. They like do that, and then that obviously brings like this incredible like risks. It's just like too crazy. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up, the liquidity aspect of centralized exchanges and what actually happens to the mafia. And I think if I remember correctly, I pulled up a comparison like to the Cosa Nostra, because there's a total intransparency there, and that money might be actually used against the users. We need to think about like all these futures markets, right? Like huge exchanges have the power to literally move the markets and influence where like futures markets move to. And as we look like what happened in the past, that's where like crypto users really like getting burned ultra hard. But yeah, sorry, here a bit off topic, but I wanted to add this.
No, I think that's fascinating that they're also they're using their exchanges to hedge, and with other people's investment, they can do whatever they want to with moving, quote unquote, moving the money around.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I think that's an excellent point that you brought up, CA. Excellent point, and one that I know that Mark Johnny Law has made repeatedly, and a lot of people in the DigiByte community have made repeatedly, is when your money is on those centralized exchanges, or when your coins and tokens are on those centralized exchanges. If you look at their terms of service, they tell you that they once it's on their exchange, they can do whatever. For an unsecured creditor, they can do whatever they want with that. And I think that's a really important part, because it's a real double-edged sword when you feel like you're forced to use a centralized exchange, but if you leave anything on it, they can use that to bet against you. So that's a fantastic point that you brought up. Thank you for that. Does anybody else want to add anything before we move forward? Okay. So talking about the pros and cons of DEXs in particular, and we've gone over this, but this is just an overview. So there's no middlemen. There's so you can work completely trustless, and you don't have to trust the person that you're working with, because you're using smart contracts and code to do that transaction. It's highly secure in the fact that you hold your own keys, so you're not putting that control in the hands of others, some anonymous person that you don't know, and even if you do know them, always holding your own keys is a measure of security. And it's anonymous. You don't have to use KYC in order to participate with the decentralized exchanges, and that's becoming, again, there's some really hot topics that I think we can dive deep into after this PowerPoint with CA. And I think that's one of the ones that really needs deeper exploring, because there's pros and cons to that as well, but having these options is really important. Permissionless, so you don't have to ask for anybody to, you don't have to, again, because tying into your KYC, we've all gone through what we had to go through to get on centralized exchanges, and it's nothing but a huge permission system. And then this one, when I was reading a couple articles, it's really kind of, this last one is really kind of the key. It's closer to Satoshi's vision, peer-to-peer cash. I mean, that's really that and security, that is the key to it. So when you're stacking up your pros and cons, each one of these it's going to be on its own spectrum for you on your risk versus reward, but closer to Satoshi's vision, especially for people in the DigiByte community. And I know for people in the Komodo community, obviously, that one little statement is a powerful ethos. But the UI can be a little tough to navigate. And we don't have the same fiat on-ramps again. And the reason why is because you're dealing with a different kind of system that's not asking for regulatory permission. And this is, again, something I think we can go deep into as far as how would that affect adoption of these DEXs. But I mean, we're standing on ground that's moving under our feet. So who knows what that actually means next week? We don't know. Again, for the cons, and we talked about this before, lower liquidity for some tokens and coins. And one thing I'd like to touch on with you, CA, after we finish this is, liquidity pools and, growth of those and where you see that long-term vision going. And then sometimes there can be limited trading options, but I have to say, based on what I've seen, this one is going down more and more every day, because the DEXs are expanding, what they're offering and what type of transactions they can do. So, again, to me, it looks like the pros list definitely outweighs the cons, but it depends on what it is you're trying to do, what it is you're trying to work with. And this technology, we've said before, it's not a one size fits all for everything, just like we don't have a single car. Depending on what you're using it for, you'd either have a fast car, a truck, a minivan, so it's up for everybody to decide when they start to use a DEX or a centralized exchange, what's their ultimate goal, and, what are those resources that they're accessing. Does anybody else want to add something to the pros and cons discussion on this? I must have done a very good job. Usually somebody has something to fill in. So, okay, well, good.
I don't have really anything to add for the pros and cons, but it would be beneficial for the community or anyone listening in the future to know exactly how DEXs operate, like running stuff via smart contracts instead of through centralized entities, like a centralized exchange.
Right, and that's what that's why we have an expert on to discuss that in more detail. So CA is he's gonna walk us through those kind of questions. This is just kind of like just a general overview. It's a really good point. Really good point. Kind of leads to, what do we need to participate with a decentralized exchange? Similar to what you need to participate with a centralized exchange. You're going to have to, if you want to, depending on what that DEX is built on, you're going to need some base currency of whatever that token is, whatever that contract is. So you might have to buy some Ethereum in order to participate. Just something to think about. You're going to have to use a wallet that's supported by that centralized exchange. And then you want to also have a cold wallet so you can transfer your funds, off back and forth, or wallet of your choice, but one where you hold your own keys. Anybody else want to add anything to that? That one's pretty simple one. Just it's what we've all been using for the centralized exchanges as well.
I do have one pro and con to add. With the pro with the
Okay.
centralized exchange is you don't have to pay network fees because basically you don't own the keys to the crypto. They do. Well, I hate the word crypto, but for the sake of argument, you own the keys to the crypto. You don't own the keys to the crypto on a centralized exchange. They do, which means
Right.
they pay all the network fees. But if you're going to use a decentralized exchange or peer-to-peer method or whatever other method you choose, you're going to have to pay network fees, which is just the cost of owning your own keys when dealing with non-centralized entities. So that's one pros and cons is network fee versus letting someone else do it for cheaper.
That's a good. I mean, that's a really good point too, and maybe CA can talk to this, or anybody else can talk to this of, how much of those network fees can get it when you're working with a centralized exchange can get transferred to you within their own internal mechanisms for their charging. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess there's kind of like a price, right? You're willing to pay for ultimate liberty, financial freedom, and yeah, I think that's kind of like the balance you gotta like find and hit. Is it worth them? Am I like a professional trader? Potentially executing thousands of trades per day, and that might really like kind of like accumulate and really become expensive when I would be using like purely like decentralized exchanges, like no question around that, right? I mean, there might be like additional solutions and enhancement possibilities, like layer 2 solutions, Lightning Network, etc., etc. But yeah, I think we can take this offline. But it's a great point. That's a very important point, and we flipped into this because it's a problem. We look at it as kind of like an obstacle, also like for user onboarding. ETH, you brought up ETH earlier. Kind of, you need ETH to trade any ERC tokens, and that's kind of like super suboptimal. So as for us, for our DEX, we're working on a solution where you, as a market participant who's not kind of like like having any ETH, any ERC related token, but wants to buy one, gather one, that you basically would be paying in the asset you'd be like trading it for. So if it's not an ETH on ERC based token, the other party, in this case like potentially the maker, would like ensure that the fees for this trade in terms of like ETH requirement are covered, and you'll just like pay a bit more, let's say like in DigiByte or Bitcoin or whatever, right? Just like to enhance the usability. So and I think I've seen like other DEX is kind of like looking at this. How can we pay the user like something upfront if we know he has an asset, but it's not the asset he needs for this specific platform, because you prevent him from trading while he actually has money and could become a user.
Well, that's good that you guys are focused on that problem and are aware of it. Does anybody else have anything to add to that? Okay. And then we're just going to end up with, here's some of the exchanges you can check out. Of course, Komodo's top. But these are some of the more popular exchanges to look at if you want to explore the topic more, use wallet, try and play with that a little bit. Does anybody have, well, I mean, we have Komodo here, so we have some, but does anybody have anything they want to add about any of these exchanges that they've participated with that, again, pros or cons, your experience with those?
Yeah, I would say for those that are familiar operating in the Ethereum world and DeFi, so to speak, network traffic becomes a real challenge. As they talk about speed and execution of a contract and a swap is really dependent upon network challenge and your ability to pay the fees, so to speak, as CA was kind of referencing there. Whereas Atomic DEX and Decred DEX use a much different protocol, which is not going to have some of the same limitations.
Oh, good point. Thank you for adding that. Does anybody else have anything they want to add before we move on? Okay. So here are some resources and videos that we would suggest maybe kind of we used as some of our reference material. if you want to take a look at that. All of this again is going to be posted on the resources channel, so feel free to download it yourself, use it yourself if you want to use it to present on DEXs, and yeah, make sure that those resources are available for you guys. And so now we're going to open it up to CA for the Q&A part of today, and like we were saying earlier, drill down into more of the mechanics of how these transactions work with the exchanges. Okay, stop sharing now, and we'll give the floor to CA.
Hey, so yeah, maybe just like as a small intro in general, I've noted a few points down. One which I really want to like clarify, like to any people listening that aren't like fully into the DEX space, etc. I mean, I wouldn't always say like a DEX equals a DEX or that kind of like a DEX equals like security or safety, because that's obviously not the case, right? Specifically, like speaking about DEXs, with DEXs or kind of like with wallets like non-custodial peer-to-peer wallets, etc. In many cases, you really have just a piece of software that handles your keys non-custodial. So you're like you have like self-custody, you own like those keys, but the rest in terms of kind of like network communication, data transfer, kind of like privacy protecting schematics and that, etc. That's all like not existent in many cases. So I want to hear like just like clarify, make sure you just need like to not trust. You must not trust, and you have like to validate it. And it's tough with many, at least like the top 10 wallets out there. They are not fully open sourced. So they either like provide a course somewhere on Git or on GitLab, and if you try like to run that on your own, and you'll realize, oh, I'm kind of missing like dozens of probably like microservices and some centralized endpoints. And this is really the case for many places, not just like wallets, not just like like DEXs, but even like higher level like protocols. There's one that's like gaining a lot of like traction and popularity is like Torchain, right? Looking at that, there's like various interfaces. I mean, one we've validated that's being routed through a kind of decentralized network, and it's like a non-custodial tech stack. But then you look like at the technology stacks that are utilized by other further third-party wallets, and you realize it's like purely like centralized like schematics, and it's based 100% on trust, right? So I'm kind of like requesting kind of like a trade proposal, and in exchange I get a JSON which has like a payment address, an amount, and also like the address I provided in the first place where I want to receive my coins to. So kind of you're being told, hey, send this and that many coins of that type to this address, and in exchange we'll send you that coins back. And this is like reality. This is Torchain interface right now. This is like how you execute a swap from a bunch of different like leading top 5 like popular like wallets, right? Like non-custodial and advertised as the most secure and decentralized wallets out there. But they aren't, and this is like super like important. And this is something like any user can validate on his own, just by further research or looking at it. And also like back to the topic we had in the beginning regarding centralized exchanges and even like custodial wallets and all that stuff. I mean, I think users and everyone needs to understand that this whole technology stack, and regardless of its comfort and how usable it is and all that stuff, right? It just defeats the whole purpose of crypto, right? Like it just doesn't make any sense, right? Like to use that with that type of technology, because centralized exchanges are just like incompatible with like crypto if you look at it really like, precisely from a technological basis. And that's like the big problem here, that like education is like a huge problem. And I mean, I do see just like damages becoming like bigger and bigger every year, and you kind of like feel actually we should like scale up educational level and scale up all these things. But if you look at the real market leaders, they ain't do any of this, right? It's just about strengthening your monopole position, kind of like make sure everyone else just like gets kind of like pushed away, that there's no awareness within like the community. If you ask like 99% of the community about crypto, what are you gonna hear? Yeah, apes, NFT, and like some other like stupid stuff, right? But yeah, anyway, just like want to add a few of these like points which I noted down.
Well, kind of to add on to that, and I figured this out when I was going through my data privacy phase, is the more convenient something is for the end user, the more centralized it tends to be. Now, if you're going for straight security, it's going to be hella inconvenient, and it's going to require a knowledge base that's far beyond the typical user of crypto or blockchain technology at the moment.
100%, yes. And that's one thing where I kind of realized, like, I try to understand why are most users like ignoring, right? Like all these things I just brought up. And yes, it's like you said, like all this comfort, stuff, but not just that. I think technically they actually would be even risking more by using purely decentralized technologies. They can't just reset their passwords and passphrases, which happens to them like all the time, right? They can't like reset their 2FA and all the things. If your key's gone, you're done. And so I understand, okay, there's like a big problem, but what can we do? And then I realized, now with the era, of AI and this like tech stack where you literally have an expert in all industry fields all the time with you 24/7, it should be like trivial, like to set up, like a user facing layer that enhances all these things, but without like implementing something, this ERC 4337, this account abstraction, which like many other protocols are talking about now, and literally trying to introduce the factor trust into like our industry, right? Like and here again, like the whole thing, like it just defeats like crypto's purpose. I mean, I do fully understand this point brought up like with comfort and all these things, and I even say there might be even like less risk having them use centralized or semi-centralized stacks. But yeah, we have to keep working on this.
Yeah, I disagree with the Ethereum 4337 merely because now I disagree with it, but it does serve a purpose to onboard new users. I disagree with it fundamentally because it takes the onus of responsibility from the individual operating a wallet or a public key and puts the onus of responsibility onto a third party to maintain the key/seed.
Yeah, 100% of that. I mean, I also think that's kind of it's a paradox. Let's put it like that. It's a paradox. We like it because we know subtile and subconsciously this is gonna like further kind of boost mainstream adoption, right? Quote unquote. But then at the same time, this is gonna create a mess. It's potentially gonna like enable, third parties, with malicious intent to create like a real mess. And I mean, not to mention all the other implications out of these legal implications, right? Like all this criminal stuff that people might face as additional risk, and so on and so on.
Well, if you're looking at it from an enforcement perspective from, government agents or third parties in general, yeah, it makes enforcement a lot easier because if they have a central point to where like, hey, give us the keys to this guy because he's a criminal, then yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like that one. But then even like, like all this like tax law, and even like in Europe, right? If you like sign or co-sign a transaction that goes, beyond certain limits and it gets like tracked by certain centralized parties or those that have access like to these reporting tools, then I think there might be even like, further legal implication in terms of, compliance questions, this, KYC, AML in between like these parties utilizing this account abstraction. And it's just like becoming like sorry, my wording here, like a legal clusterfuck and the technological one just like on top. But yeah.
I think that's a really good point to bring up is, we've got, and I was going to ask you about this as far as like, where do you see things in the future with the fiat on ramps? Because you've got these legal, you've got these legal entities and countries that are going to have access to that data. It's like, how do you get a fiat on ramp without compromising your own personal security in that way? If you had any thoughts on that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, maybe I'll just like kick it off by stating that we're like currently implementing a fiat on-ramp solution into like the atomic DEX. I believe like any like DEX that want to do this would have like to follow kind of strict isolation approach. Also, like in terms of kind of like how do we kind of preserve privacy and all these things, it's also important to mention that I believe there is no privacy, right? Like in order to really like utilize privacy on a high level, you need like further technologies, kind of like alternative routing protocols, I2P, Tor, or /Onion, and all these things. Other than that, there is no like real privacy, and it would be like possible like for anyone, to kind of like code kind of like a crawler, that tracks all the like pub keys and kind of like creates IP correlations with like different like methodologies. And yeah, here I'd say like this isolation now regards it is like to kind of protect like the user as best as we can, right? It's always, I also say we can't provide 100% security because we can only do it as best as like we can, and as best as we can tell the user like to behave. But there is no ultimate security. Anyone who promises you something like that is just like lying. In our case, by using like a fiat on-ramp solution, the user doesn't have to provide any additional data. You wouldn't provide a fiat gateway anyway. So by providing like bank account details, a name that correlates to this bank account, having the terms of service box within this fiat on-ramp window, kind of like telling you, like, hey, provide like all your banking data and this and that. And that means, it assumes that this bank data is already like validated and verified, right? The only data you additionally provide is your like public key, and that's something like the DEX or the wallet does on its own. So what we have like to know is that all fiat on-ramps and all these like fiat gateways, centralized exchange gateways, they will always know to which public key or to which address you send the tokens, right? This is something you cannot like hide. I believe with none of the cryptocurrencies out there, not even those that claim to be fully like anonymous, right? There's a few of them, and I just want to highlight this because a lot of people might be mistaken there and believe that this is like ultimate privacy, but it isn't. Yeah, this is very important to know. And yeah, so just to answer the question in short, is like you kind of need to isolate, the environment. So if you have like a fiat on-ramp solution, you need to make sure this is like handled 100% like third party, right? I wouldn't want to like start, messing with user data, providing user data, doing something along those lines. It brings like many risks, not just like the legal ones, but and this is like how we basically managed. We found a fiat on-ramp provider that kind of gives us like the needed APIs, the endpoints where the user can do exactly this. Just provide your bank data or credit card information, name, etc. And they use the native validation methods that come natively with these payment solutions, right? If it's like a bank or a credit card, they all have like this validation method. So the only thing the user then provides or the app provides to this endpoint is like the address, and you actually then just get your coins, and that's it, right? And they'll assume that bank account is like validated. And this also like to highlight, this is now like looking specifically at like Europe. I mean, the image like implementation is targeting Europe, but we have like international access like with this specific fiat on-ramp solution.
And also to add on to that, the fiat gateway is only one aspect to obtaining crypto. If they want to shut off that road, there's always a second path of mining. So this could have the secondary effect of actually pushing people towards mining crypto instead of just using fiat to get it.
That is a great point. That is a great point.
Or earn it. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Earn it.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of earn, because I was like, I haven't bought DigiByte yet, but I want to earn it. And I was talking with a friend of mine. I was like, maybe I should start a tutoring thing on the side where you pay me in DigiByte and you get a major discount if you pay it in DigiByte. So, I mean, I think, that's the key, ultimately, like you said, if you don't want to have to use a fiat on-ramp, there are other methods. And maybe those are some of the things that we need to start highlighting more just in general,
Well, and I think that accelerates the development of a true marketplace for crypto where we actually begin to use it as intended as well, right? So the more participants that we have operating in a parallel marketplace and starting to use the crypto as intended as a peer-to-peer payment system, I think it grows pretty quickly from there. And to your point, Twinzen, like if we look at hash rate just at Bitcoin, I think we already started seeing this realization come into play where the competition for coins outside of the banking system or outside of the centralized exchange system is going to grow exponentially, along with, of course, all the investment that's been made in the mining hardware. on the efficiencies that we see. I think that's going to come to pass across many chains as people recognize that coins that aren't locked on inside these banks are going to become exceedingly rare, and they are kind of your ticket to a free market.
Well, yeah, that kind of happened to me when I got tired of buying crypto through fiat on-ramps and centralized exchanges with providing KYC and all my personal information, eventually switching it to Monero and then cross-chain via DEXs for privacy. Then I started to mine it, and it was like, okay, well, no more KYC for me because I already have a way to get it.
Hey everyone, it's Jose, and I had a question for CA, and I wanted to ask, how does does the DEX, enable or further enable interoperability between networks?
Great. So thanks for the question. So what we did, right, like with the Atomic DEX, we didn't like build or code it like on one specific platform or a specific core or protocol, right? Also, it's not like a smart contract. It's literally like a platform and protocol, like agnostic like piece of technology and software. So its interface is kind of like generic, right? Like we've kind of like started with a basic set of kind of like protocol interoperabilities and kind of compatibilities, if you want to put it like that. That's like Ethereum, Binance Smart Chain, like kind of like the most popular like networks, right? And obviously, I mean, for example, we when we like implemented the support for Bitcoin, I mean that inherited like native core protocol compatibility to all UTXO based like blockchains, right? Like including DigiByte, right? Like so, and that's kind of like this generic approach. So adding a new coin or token or a set or whatever from kind of like 99 point something percent of kind of like the coin market cap list becomes a matter of like configuration. I mean, that's like the kind of like the high level kind of answer to your question in regards like how do we like further boost the interoperability. And we didn't stop there, right? Like so there's protocols which will need kind of like where you need like, since it's like in kind of like a standalone kind of like DEX bridge tech, if you want to put it like that, there's like certain protocols we need like to add kind of like mixes, kind of like protocol specifications for the DEX to understand it. For example, we've started like our core ideology and vision was to start like with the cross-chain, cross-protocol atomic swap protocol that was based on Tier Nolan's outline of a cross-chain atomic swap. But we've then like kind of enhanced it, removed additional like required like transaction steps to make it a bit more efficient, less expensive, still preserving the full like security scope. So still like removing the risk, for any like counterparty. And this is kind of like our approach. And for some protocols, for example, look at Ethereum, right? You don't have like the tools you have like on the BTC script, right? Like for example, hash and time locks. So yeah, one example like of these capabilities of script, which is kind of like a condition on the blockchain stack, where the blockchain itself or the protocol or this consensus layer will look at these conditions, kind of make sure, okay, conditions are met or not met, and only if certain like events happen, or if a certain kind of information was revealed in the blockchain network, only then, right, will a certain kind of like operation be allowed or executed, or maybe even data revealed, like a secret for someone to spend a coin, which would be part of an atomic swap as well, right? So that's like something you wouldn't have natively on ETH. So what we did is we would implement a smart contract. We called it like Atomic, and that would kind of like simulate the needed kind of interface to simulate such a hash and time lock. However, we've recently kind of reevaluated situation when we started, like 8 years ago to work on this tech stack. Things weren't like that expensive. So now we figured, okay, we need to like kind of think about the user, like regardless of all like these kind of like many like protocols. We just like want to make it as efficient and as comfortable for the user. So our team has like kind of like an overlay kind of like layer here in this architecture for things such as ERC20 to ERC20 smart contract like swap tech, where you just use native like EVM smart contract, execute like this swap within one transaction as opposed to a few transactions. if you look like at how the native like atomic DEX protocol would make it. But yeah, without like to go like too deep into the core protocol like outline and architecture, I hope this answers your question, and this is like how we continue. Yeah, if we see like, for example, now we've like completed like the IBC stack integration and compatibility, and that's like for the whole Cosmos network, which I believe is like the number 2, number 3 within like the world when we all look at the code and how active it is. And that also means like, for the listeners and you guys, that DigiByte is natively compatible with Cosmos, with IBC, due to this like interoperability step, which is like 100% open source and 100% decentralized, like no bullshitting, and you can read the code.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I like to talk a lot about kind of like looking ahead at the future when I talk to people, and interoperability is one of those things. It's like, different blockchains that could be able to communicate. And right now, you just talked about different solutions, the smart contracts, the atomic swaps, and let's bring it closer, to people being able to swap from one network to the next. And I think when I mention interoperability, people right away think bridges, and we've kind of seen like the vulnerability with bridges. But no, it's kind of, I ask because that kind of builds on my understanding and being able to explain that to people that it's still in the works, but it's coming, and it's we're still looking at an interoperable future.
Yeah, when it comes to bridges, that's more of a cross-chain solution rather than an interoperability solution.
Yeah, it might be a mix. If we look, I think it might be like, it might depend like on the definition of the bridge. Yeah, there's like many bridges, and we've seen like negative examples in the past, like with like big damage, like like hitting the users. With some DEX protocols, or at least like the visions, like the core ideologies, as such, also like including like the atomic DEX, we have something we call a bridge, right? And it's like on the bridge interface. However, what happens is it's still like going to utilize the core like DEX network, right? You still go through an atomic swap, right, or like a straight like a contract swap, right, with the hybrid model, and kind of it's still like 100% trustless. The big problem here I see with a lot of like DeFi solutions, like a lot of like these AMMs. I still believe kind of like, and I think Laura like touched base on this like in the beginning regarding liquidity pools, right, where we see this like going and heading, and I believe like that's like one topic where I see kind of like hybrid architectures, kind of like if you have like a maybe an off-chain order book network, but still the possibility for like kind of not semi-centralized managed liquidity, but network managed liquidity, right, like through the network as such. Kind of like, I think these approaches like will help a lot. But if you look at like the bridges that like were hacked or where like people suffer rug pulls, that's because of this like heavily centralized structure where people can, like a small group of people or even just one human controls, for example, smart contract deployment keys, smart contracts like remain upgradable, and all these things, and users are not aware of it. And and if we ask ourselves what did lead to this like big damage and all this loss of money, it's trust, because they implemented trust. And that's why I always say, right, like personally, I would throw like I don't need kind of like comfort, a little bit maybe, but I'd rather like prefer to be just like safe as possible. And I think if users learn all these things, they will like make the same decision 100%. It's, for me, it's a very rational decision to kind of not trust any centralized or even like semi-centralized solution.
Speaking of trust, I want to, if you don't mind, I know we're kind of getting close on time, but this is the announcement that you guys just made about becoming open source was huge. And I think that comes down to trust. And can you talk a little bit about, how did y'all come to that decision? Why did you choose now? Was it a difficult decision to make? If you don't mind talking about that aspect of Komodo in particular.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a quick one, because the decision was made like over 2 years ago when we started like coding it, but we just like said, okay, this is going to be like a wallet. Initially, sorry, it was a collaboration with like a smartphone producer, really like in like US contact with one of our like former co-workers. And we weren't really like targeting to build a mobile wallet, but we said, okay, let's do this. And then we figured, okay, open sourcing it now might also like bring risk. We don't know if this is like safe, secure. So we kept like this kind of like dev tag on it, and actually like been warning users like always to not put too much money on it, and still have the beta tag on it actually. But now we reached a state where it's considered like pretty like stable. So I still don't want to like tag it stable because we have an independent external third-party security assessment ongoing, which will then like allow us to put like a stable and kind of like a reviewed tag on it. We do ourselves review these like technologies, and we have completed a full secure code review, not just like on the code base that we produced over the years, but also on all utilized code libraries and third-party dependencies. So everything we didn't write, and that's like from an external party in terms of libraries whatsoever, has been like thoroughly reviewed and validated. So now we figured, okay, now we've completed the tech pretty much. It's like stable, and it can be like be shared with others, like to build on top of it, to reuse it. And foremost, I think what's been like the biggest motivation is to put other producers of such technology on a pressure, hopefully, or to challenge them to do something similar, right? Because we are gonna keep polishing this, and we have a very like different like business model than all these kind of wallet providers, and I think they're doing a bad job if you look like at usability, speed, and all these things. And I believe like that, yeah, that there's like a big chance like for us like to kind of like show not just like the end users but also like these wallet producers that you should like do it transparently, right? Like, because it's something that's like super important. If we look at like core technology stacks really used by a lot of like people, in most cases they are like open source, right? And free on top.
That's fantastic. And I think you're right. I think that I think showing that it can be done like this really does put more pressure out there, which I'm really grateful for. And I didn't realize you guys are also having a third party review as well, which is also exciting. And that's a smart way to do it. You basically beta test it for a while before you put it into the wild, and that's pretty prudent. I didn't realize that it had been ongoing for that long, but so that's very cool. We're kind of getting close to time, so does anybody have any last minute questions for CA before we wrap up? Okay, well, this was a fantastic discussion. Twinsen, you made some really good points that makes me want to add a couple additional slides to the PowerPoint. So thank you for that. Thank everybody for your questions. And CA, you did a fantastic job, really fantastic. So we really thank you for being here and being our expert on the channel today. And we'll do everything we can to help educate our community on the resources you guys have made, and really look forward to working with you more in the future on this for sure.
I thank you very much. It was very, very interesting, and thanks everyone. Yeah, thank you, Twinsen and Cartoons, Saguaro, yeah, and everyone else. That was really great. Thanks, Johnny and Laura for arranging this, and looking forward to the next time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, everybody have a wonderful Sunday. These things will be posted on our resources channel, the video and the PowerPoint. So anybody feel free to take those, use those, whatever you need. Spread that information out there, and have a lovely rest of your weekend, everybody. Thanks again, Archie.
Yeah, and thank you, CA. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, CA. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Peace.